o'clock. So hang on. I got my little script here.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and I don't have mine either because I have my iPad. Yeah.
Okay. With that, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody that's watching at home as well as here at the audience. We thank you for being here and present with us tonight. We'd like to begin our meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We thank you for your strength and resilience protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. I know we'll probably have a lot of interaction tonight in one form or another. Hopefully it's all good, that we may do so with respect, dignity, patience, and charity toward each other. Again, for those that are out there in the hallway, we have the back room. Just go around the corner. You'll see a big meeting room back there all set up. There's video, and you can see us and watch us on TV if you like, or you can, and there's also the audio back there. So we'll have this door open for when people want to come in. So if you want to be more comfortable, you're more than welcome to go back and take a seat. You can see everything that's happening. Okay, and that's why we designed it that way. Anyway, tonight we have two meetings. The first is a special meeting. We'll have one item that we will deal with, and then we will recess that meeting, and then we'll go to our study session, and we'll have a discussion for what most of the, I would imagine, the audience is here for. So we'll take that from there. With that, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Colbert,
Yes, here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Commissioner Stanley,
Here.
Commissioner Treadwell,
Here.
Commissioner Werner,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Shamrock,
Here.
Mayor.
Here. Okay, we have announcements from the interim city manager.
I have none this evening.
Okay. Announcements from the deputy city clerk.
Act 345 will meet Tuesday, August 29th at noon in the training room. The Historic Districts Commission will meet on Thursday, August 31st at noon in the committee room. As a reminder, city offices will be closed on Monday, September 4th in observation of Labor Day, and will reopen at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, September 5th. And I would like to remind the commissioner, staff, and the members of the public to speak into microphones so those watching at home, and the recording of this meeting is easily heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, for our first topic under our special meeting is consideration of authorizing a contract for the 2023 pavement preservation project. And I will turn this over to you, sir.
I'm actually going to ask Zach from the engineering department to come up and introduce this item.
Hello, Zach with City Engineering, here to introduce the 2023 pavement preservation project. We're looking at doing various streets in the city with Maple and 12th. We're also doing the two intersections, which I know were a good topic of conversation at the DDA meeting, but really we're looking at doing just a handful of streets through, I think it's TIF and a couple other other funds which are also listed in the memo.
Yeah, the one thing I would note is we did have proposals, as we've seen with a lot of our construction bids, come in a little higher, and that's what was the reason the DDA needed to go through this a little bit further. As far as schedule, the two intersections, the goal is to have those done this fall because they are we've got the Grandview Parkway construction going on, so we want to get those done and out of the way. Most likely, the other projects will be into next construction season.
So I do have assurances from Elmer's that if they finish these two intersections fast enough, that they will try and do two of the streets immediately this fall, so there'll be less disruptions coming into next year.
Okay. Okay. Also, you mentioned Maple Street and 12th Street, but I think you also another major street's going to be Eastern Avenue. So,
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. And some railroad avenue improvements. We've been waiting for that for a long time.
Long time. Dirt road there, basically.
Okay. So anyway, so we have a motion.
No, not yet.
Okay, hang on one second. We have one item. with what the bids came in, there are the project as it relates to the couple of parking lots is not going to be funded this year, so go ahead.
So with the same, I think, idea of the urgency of those two intersections prior to the MDOT project for the, I don't know, smooth and comfortable motor vehicles, this body has discussed, and the Planning Commission has discussed, sidewalk along Eastern between Peninsula and Milliken for the safety, more than convenience, but the safety of pedestrians, because that's the main detour route for all vehicles coming on and off of Old Mission Peninsula. And so it's been discussed, and we've never said to a city manager or assistant city manager, we want this done. Like it keeps being discussed and kind of pushed off with acknowledgement that, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, but we never say, please make it so. So how, maybe it's not here, but how do we get assurances to the public that lives at the base of the peninsula that there will be a sidewalk installed on the south side of Eastern? It would be a shame to repave all that just to tear it out, because we have done that in the past for other things, and the public looks at us kind of cross-eyed, like, why did you invest that money just to tear it out? So I don't know the exact best way to do this. Maybe we do have to pave it and then tear it out, but it would be great to have a sidewalk installed there prior to MDOT's detour.
Right. You're talking about from
Peninsula to Milliken on the south side.
Millikens. Well, can you take a look at that? And if we need to do some emergency on that, then we can bring that back to us.
So we are looking at bringing that back. We
Okay.
have currently under survey contract with Land Tech to look at that last block there between Milliken and Eastern and Peninsula Drive. And then we'll revisit that, hopefully short of spring, and do an amendment to the contract.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate
Okay.
that.
Okay.
But it would be this contract.
It would be this same contract. It would come back as an amendment.
Okay, great, thank you. And if you move it quicker, well, that's true. This street,
It's going to happen in the spring.
it's going to happen in the spring. Okay,
Not
good.
that often.
In order to get the survey back on time, it's going to have to happen in the spring.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, I think it's on the agenda, so thank you. Okay. All right, we have a proposed motion to work on this.
I'll make the motion that the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute a unit price contract with Elmer's Crane and Dozer Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $2,577,831.26 for the 2023 pavement preservation project, intersection repair, and parking lot reconstruction and repair, with the contract subject to approval as to its substance by the interim city manager and form by the city attorney, with funds available in the Road Commission Millage Fund, the Capital Projects Fund, the Parking Fund, and the Downtown Development Authority TIF Fund.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and we have support. Is there anybody who would like to make any kind of comments? Okay.
We
Rick
ask-
Buckholder, 932. Oh, go ahead.
Pause. Thank you. We ask that you state your name and address, indicate if you are a city resident, non-city resident, and/or city business owner. We have a 3-minute time allotment per speaker. When your time is elapsed, the timer will beep. And finally, we request that all language be respectful to all parties.
Darn. Rick Buckholder, 932 Kelly Street. I'm a Traverse City resident. Number one, Mayor Lewis, gentleman just informed me there's absolutely no sound in the training room.
Really? Okay, well, then we will hold up until we get it ready to roll. Okay, thank you.
Want me to continue?
You're going to continue on
Yeah.
more public comment?
Yeah.
Okay,
I watched the DDA meeting concerning the intersection work at 8th and Union and 8th and Cass, and I believe there was some confusion about what the cost was going to be, and they were correcting it when they were discussing it, and I think it had jumped to almost $800,000, $0.8 for 2 intersections. Okay? My question is, one of the DDA board members said, how much would it cost if we just asphalted it and marked it? He said $100,000. So as hard up as people are for money in this town during the recession, Is that a good expenditure of taxpayer money, whether it's TIF dollars or done at the same thing with a different name? I don't think that's a good idea to spend that much money, because it just isn't that impactful. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay. We got a message on that today about what all was going in there, but there's a lot of underground stuff that's going to be put in for later work, and possibly also improving the handicap access and a number of other items that are going to go in there. So it's not just going to be a plain intersection. So it's going to be more than just that. Okay, just for information. All right. Anyone else have public comment? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Okay.
And the audio has been fixed in the training room, so it is increased in there, and there's about a 20-second delay from what's happening in here to what you're viewing on the screen in the room.
Okay.
How's that?
Thank you, Sarah.
So, I mean, I have 20, no, I don't have 20 seconds to correct anything. Never mind. Okay. With that, we will now recess our special meeting, and I will now open the study session meeting. Okay, we only have one item for this, for the study session, and that deals with the proposed zoning ordinance amendments to residential density that has been provided to us from the Planning Commission. So it's clear. There will be no decisions made tonight at this meeting. This is a study session. We cannot make ultimate decisions or vote on any items. We're going to be looking to the September 5th meeting to carry on any discussion that takes place tonight to make a more determined, or for the City Commission to make a decisive next steps that they would like to undertake regarding this. And I'll explain more about that later on in the meeting. Right now, tonight we are having a presentation by our Planning Director, Sean Winter, as relates to on the purpose of these amendments, as well as what the zoning amendments mean. So we do have the screens up. I think you'll be able, those in the audience will be able to see the presentation as we're going through this, I hope. It'll help when you see the slides. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Sean to do the presentation. And I'm going to ask one question, Sean. Would you rather have questions from us as you're going through the presentation, or wait till you finish and then we can ask you clarifying questions?
Either way would be fine.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure. All right. Okay. We just click on everything. Can
Okay,
everybody
thank
see?
you.
Okay. What about this one back here?
That one's a little, it lags sometimes, but it'll kick
What?
on. It lags sometimes, but it'll usually kick on.
Okay.
Huh.
Again, good evening,
Can
Sean.
everybody see okay out there? Okay. Thank you. All right.
All right.
Go ahead, Sean.
I'm also joined today by Debbie Hershey. She's the current Planning Commission Chair, to be part of this discussion on the Planning Commission's recommendation for zoning amendments related to housing. So we'll start with, how did we get here? So the planning, well, first of all, let me set the stage that when it comes to our housing crisis, we really have two separate components that we're dealing with. They do, yes, overlap at time. The first is availability, or the lack thereof, of our housing stock. And that can be addressed through land use regulations, which really is the purview of the Planning Commission. They do the objective analysis, they do the heavy lifting on it. Yes, ultimately it is the City Commission's decision, but the most of the workload is handed off to them. The affordability component is often addressed through development incentives, and that's the purview of the City Commission. Until recently, there was very few tools that the City Commission had to address affordability, but at the end we will talk about some new legislative changes to help address that. So the Planning Commission began this current effort in 2020, starting to explore ways to address housing. At the beginning of 2021, they adopted their annual goals, which specifically spoke to providing housing opportunities. And they discussed things in the language that they adopted, such as rezoning of parcels for higher density, modifying development regulations, setbacks, building height, parking requirements, things of that nature. That goal continued into 2022, again focusing on creating opportunities to create new housing variety. In 2022, They included a bullet point list of about 6 items that they were going to review as part of their discussion. Admittedly, things were a little slow that year because 2022 was the year that we kicked off the master plan and the mobility action plan, so that did take a lot of our time. But that continued into 2023, where once again, they included language in their goals and objectives of looking at ways to provide additional housing opportunities and allow numerous points of entry into being a resident within the community. Specifically, what they were talking about is missing middle housing. So that is the spectrum of housing type that falls between the single-family detached housing and the higher density apartment complex type housing. So some examples include duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, accessory dwelling units, cluster housing, and row houses. And all of these may look familiar to you because they're all from within Traverse City.
John, can I just have you put the mic a little bit closer?
How's that?
That's better, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, we
thank
need
you.
to speak into the mic.
Thank you. And again, these all may look familiar to you, as I was saying, because they are all in Traverse City, because we didn't start regulating land use in the city until 1943. And at that point, when we adopted our first zoning map, all the areas on the map that are colorized allowed 2 or more dwelling units. So this really isn't about introducing something new, but kind of getting back to maybe some of the historic residential development pattern that has created much of the neighborhoods that we have today. And so because of this, when you look back, every one of these red dots on here is a non-conforming residential parcel or structure. And these are just the ones where the property owners have come in and voluntarily sought a non-conforming use certificate. So we know there's even more out there than that. So over the course of time since 2020, the Planning Commission has held nearly 30 public meetings, all of which were properly noticed with agendas available online and meeting materials. They were all televised as well as made available through recording, including the period through COVID. So now we'll jump into the 6 amendments that they have recommended for you. The first is to allow up to 4 dwelling units in the R2 district. We currently allow 2 dwelling units per lot in the R2 district, and we allow them to be either in the same structure, such as a duplex, or 2 separate detached residential structures. This proposed amendment would maintain the maximum of 2 residential structures per lot, so you could get to the maximum dwelling of 4 in a number of combinations. It could be 2 separate duplex structures, it could be a triplex with an ADU, or it could be a quadplex. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see that number there indicating 57% support. That was based on the people that took the time to fill out and submit the handouts at our open house on May 16th. So it wasn't a very large snapshot of people, but it was a metric that we had that we wanted to include for you, just so you could see what we are hearing from those meetings.
Sean, if I could just add a little bit more to that, what that kind of helps us indicate with the city commission is which of these amendments have a little more questions to them, if you will, than some of the others. And you'll see that more when we get through the other 5.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the benefits of this approach is that it mimics the existing development pattern in that R2 district. So starting at the bottom right, we do allow single-family homes. We allow a single-family home with a detached ADU. We do allow 2 detached homes, and we allow a duplex where both dwelling units are in the same structure. So what's opposed now is a duplex with a detached ADU, a triplex with an ADU, or a quadplex. In all instances, it keeps a primary principal larger residential structure up near the street front, and the opportunity in some cases for a more subordinate, smaller residential structure towards the rear of the lot. So I put these in there, the reasons for support and concerns that we drew from those worksheets that were turned into us. I'm not going to spend the time going through them all. I just wanted to make them available to you. One thing you'll probably notice if you went through in your packet, there's probably some reoccurring themes that you're seeing from one amendment to the other. So next one would be to allow duplexes by right in the R1B district. Currently, we do allow duplexes in that district, but through a city commission SLUP, and I have to admit, is a very onerous process. Our current zoning administrator has been here 22 years, and no one's ever gone through that. He can recall of one before his time, but not since. So in this case, unlike the R2, this would require that both dwelling units be in the same structure, so it looks like a single-family home and does not have that 2 homes on 1 lot feel. And again, that's to preserve that single-family character of development. The next is to reduce the minimum lot size to 1 acre for cluster housing. Currently, we require a minimum of 5 acres. We have no 5-acre parcels in those districts, so it makes it kind of a moot point. So by reducing it down to 1 acre, we actually are able to provide some opportunities for cluster housing, which is a way of creatively siting houses within a property, helping to protect environmentally sensitive areas, create common areas, social interaction areas, things like that. It was also proposed to switch from a city commission SLUP to an administrative SLUP. So one of the benefits, again, there with the cluster housing is it does allow for the efficient use of land. May not be for everyone, but for some, that might be a type of community development that they would appreciate. Next, we have allowing 2 principal dwellings in the R1 AB district on lots that are twice the minimum area. We have many lots that exceed double the minimum land area. However, due to other dimensional standards, they're unable to be split, such as they don't have enough frontage requirement, or the existing development pattern of where the house is situated would prevent that without creating nonconformities with the setbacks. So here's an example that we talked about at the open house. Right here on the upper left, we have I don't know how well you can see that with the parcel lines, but we have a large parcel on Peninsula Drive and one with access off Randall Court that fronts on Milliken. Both of them are way beyond twice the minimum lot area, but because of their lot width, they can't be split. However, they both could accommodate an additional second house with access to proper road frontage within the setback envelopes on those properties. So that is what this one is essentially trying to achieve. All right, so the Fifth Amendment had to do with dimensional standards. It was proposed that R1A, the minimum lot width, be reduced from 90 feet to 70 feet. For R1B, I apologize, I have those flip-flopped. It would be 45 feet down to 35 feet, noting that this would only apply to the base of the peninsula. All other parts of R1B are already a 35-foot minimum lot width, and then R2 would stay the same. For minimum lot area, it's proposed that R1A be reduced from 9,000 square feet to 7,000. R1B be reduced from 5,000 to 4,000, and R2 staying the same. And all 3 of them receiving a roughly 5% increase in impervious surface, simply to allow a similarly sized house on a smaller lot from the houses around it. All right. And the last one is one you probably heard the most about in your communications, and that was modifications to the ADU requirements. The first one was to remove the annual cap to support the development of ADUs. Yes, it's true, we currently have a cap of 15. We used to have 10. We have not hit 15 since we've gotten there, but acknowledging that ADUs are an ADUs are an appropriate residential use and that we do permit them, and that we do have a shortage of housing. In the event that we had 17 applicants one year, would it be in the city's best interest to deny 2 of them, given those circumstances? The other one would be to allow the ADUs in more flexible development patterns, such as with duplexes in the R1A, as was proposed, and with duplexes and triplexes in the R2, and then to remove the owner occupancy requirement. And I just want to point out, because there's been a lot of conversation about this, we currently do not have any owner occupancy requirement for any other type of residential renting. So someone could own a duplex right now and rent both units out. Someone could own a single family home and rent it out. Someone could have a triplex and rent it out. So that was the thought pattern, the logic behind eliminating the owner occupancy requirement for the ADUs, is that we simply don't require it anywhere else. All right, so now some additional considerations. I believe you've received the housing needs assessment that Housing North recently commissioned. They did it for the 10-county area, breaking it down into each of the 10 counties. I apologize about that. Then we actually paid to have them do one for Traverse City specifically. And one of the things that this housing needs assessment identified is, unlike most of the state, the Traverse City region is continuing to grow in population while the others are decreasing. So the reality is people are, in fact, coming here. There was projections made that in the next 5 years, lower income renters and homeowners are projected to decrease in the area, while only the higher income renters and homeowners are projected to increase. Currently, Traverse City has approximately a 2,200 dwelling unit gap in its housing needs, with almost a 50-50 mix between rental units and units available for sale. We need approximately 11,000 units in Grand Traverse County. It noted that a healthy housing market has 2 to 3% of its housing stock available for sale at any point. Traverse City is at 0.7%, and that a healthy rental market has a 4 to 6% vacancy rate, and Traverse City currently is at 0.6%. So the report noted that both of those factors are contributing to driving up the cost of living within the city. So over the last couple years, the Planning Commission has attended numerous local workshops, regional summits, state conferences, studying and listening on the subject of housing. They've been reading research, listening to local housing specialists, listening to our employers, really paying attention to what possible solutions are out there. And time again, what they're hearing is what they've recommended to you as ways to help address that availability component. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, availability can be tied to affordability. That's the whole idea of the supply and demand. So one of these articles, which by the way, back here, all these research articles that are listed and all these letters of support are available on the story map for review. So the Pew Charitable Trust tracked 4 different communities starting in 2017 through 2021 who made similar changes to their zoning to allow more flexibility in their housing. And on the left, in the dark blue bar, you can see that each of the 4 communities, and in some cases, like Tyson's Corner, considerably outperformed the increase in their local housing stock compared to the nation as a whole. And collectively, the 4 communities that they tracked from 2017 to 2023 had an average rental rate increase of 3.5%, while the nation as a whole during that same time period went up approximately 31%. So moving on, what are some of the potential benefits of varied housing stock that the Planning Commission has explored? Well, front and center in their effort throughout all of this was making sure that people were provided with housing for all stages of life and a variety of different needs. Currently, 83% of our residentially zoned land is zoned just for single-family use, which doesn't provide a lot of variety. By having people be able to live closer to their everyday activities, they can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, decrease vehicle miles driven, provide more opportunities to utilize motorized transportation, increase public transit viability, and possibly live in smaller footprint dwellings that are more energy efficient. And of course, with all of this, hoping to prevent the spread of sprawl and taking advantage of existing infrastructure. There's also indications that this can strengthen social connections and improve public health and reduce housing, financial, and economic instability. I want to speak briefly on our historic districts. We have 3 of them in the city. You're not allowed to go and demolish a home in a historic district unless you get historic district approval, and the bar for that is quite high. You have to prove to the Historic District Commission that the house has no viable use anymore before they can issue a permit for demo. Again, our zoning administrator has been here for 22 years, and that's never happened, and he, to his knowledge, has never known it to happen. So historic district neighborhoods, you guys have an extra layer of protection, for sure. And whenever we make changes or discuss changes like this, it's important to note that beyond the surface, there are often layers of limitations that reduce the impact or the effectiveness of them. So for instance, with these housing amendments that have been proposed, in order for them to be actualized, the zoning has to allow what is being pursued in that particular district. The conditions of the site need to be able to support what is being pursued. The property owner, and this is probably the most important one, has to be willing to make a change to their property. They also have to have the financial resources, which this day and age is becoming more and more challenging, as well as finding a contractor to be able to perform that work. So just lastly, with additional considerations, I wanted to address some ongoing efforts. The Planning Commission does recognize that housing is not a city-specific issue, but rather a regional issue. So we have an economic development contract with Traverse Connect, and they have been convening local housing partners to have these type of discussions and better understand what solutions work best in each jurisdiction, because what works best in Garfield, thank you, may not work best in Traverse City. They have different contexts to their community. I'd also like to commend Housing North, who throughout the summer has been leading the effort on a regional housing plan. This is taking place throughout the entire state under the state's adopted Michigan statewide housing plan. And I think Yarrow's here today, may be able to speak on it, but that draft for our region is just getting wrapped up for public review shortly. We met last week. So next steps and discussion items for the City Commission. It's really about policy decisions, even though no decisions are being made today, but this is the start of the conversation on how you would like to proceed. whether it is to take action or not to take action on any of these items, to break the recommendation into individual components, maybe to identify which ones you want to move forward, which ones you want to table, and if it ends up being the case, if there's any that you want to send back to the Planning Commission for further analysis. I'd like to talk about a couple other things that have been brought up throughout this conversation over the last few months. Thank you. The first is code enforcement. There's been a lot of concerns raised about property maintenance and absentee landlords. I think it's possible through our police power ordinances and code enforcement, we can address the behavior, in other words, regulate the user rather than prohibit the use to address the actual problems that people are concerned about. This may result in needing to invest more resources in code enforcement. That's a possible discussion to have in the future. It may be possible to have a rental inspection program or some sort of property maintenance program. However, we would need to possibly have some sort of ballot initiative because we have this language in our charter that prohibits such programs for single-family and two-family houses. So that could really be done two ways. The city electric could approve such a program, or they could approve an amendment to the charter to remove this prohibition. So two things to consider. I want to talk about short-term rentals. So none of the proposed amendments would permit more short-term rentals. That's just not on the table in any means. They're completely prohibited in our residential neighborhoods. I will note that we have had much improved enforcement through a recent contract that we've had with Granicus and Host Compliance. They've been able to take those listings that appear online and identify the location of where that short-term rental is. Then we have a point of contact, a name that we can go after. And we've sent out over 150 warning letters now, and now that people have been warned, the next time they have a documented stay, we can write them a ticket. And we can show the magistrate that, yes, we've tried to get them compliant, which is the goal of enforcement. We sent them a letter, and they're continuing to do so. And to wrap up, going back to what I had mentioned at the beginning, there are some new affordable housing tools coming online for you. These are legislative changes to allow more local development of affordable housing incentives through primarily tax abatements. They require each of them to establish a geographic area. So the benefit of that is you could take this proposed type of zoning and direct it to certain locations where you want to incentivize more housing or incentivize additional development. And since I believe Yarrow Brown from Housing North will be coming to you next month, maybe begin talking about some of these, I won't get into them a whole lot. But really, there's a combination of two new tools, the Residential Facilities Act and the Attainable Housing Facilities Act, that provide tax abatements. Really, the main difference between them is how many units they can be applied for. So the first one is for projects that are 5 or more dwelling units. The other one can be applied to even smaller units like duplexes, because it's for 4 or fewer dwelling units. There's been some changes to the payment in lieu of taxes. You all are aware of that because you've established the ad hoc that met again today to review the draft. There's some changes to the neighborhood enterprise zone, which encourages compact development utilizing our existing infrastructure. And then lastly, the brownfield TIF funding has been amended to now allow housing to be an eligible expense for reimbursement. And that tool can be used with some of the other tools in conjunction to further strengthen that incentive. So with that,
Okay.
I am wrapped
Okay.
up. So
First,
I don't know if Debbie had anything.
Ms. Hershey, I'll allow you, I know you have a statement you would like to make, so
Yes.
I'll allow you to do that, so please.
Thank you. I'd like to stress that I'm the newly elected chair of the Traverse City Planning Commission, and here I am. Thank you, commissioners, for addressing this very important topic of proposed zoning amendments for housing variety. John F. Kennedy, our nation's youngest elected president, said, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." Tonight's discussion is about our future. The Planning Commission did not suddenly decide to investigate housing options. Rather, housing has been a top priority of the City Commission for a long time, with some city officials saying discussions have been ongoing for 15 years. As a result, lack of housing became a top Planning Commission goal when we were tasked by you to recommend possible solutions. Please be assured that the recommendations before you were not rushed. For 3 years, planning staff and commissioners have attended national, state, and local housing conferences. We have researched and pored over dozens of articles and have held numerous public meetings and listening sessions. We know, of course, there is a national housing crisis, but our job as planning commissioners is to determine what we can do here within the city, not in any outlying areas. Currently, thousands of towns and cities across America are studying the exact same things, zoning changes that offer housing variety. These proposed zoning amendments before you are indeed best practices. Last week at Zoom sessions about the master plan review, dozens of stakeholders attended, representing businesses, the healthcare and school systems, senior citizens, the unhoused, housing, arts and culture, and more. In each session, we heard the word crisis, and the crisis is now and is tied to a lack of staffing due to young people leaving our city because they cannot find housing. We have witnessed a breathtaking number of young people leaving our city, and they represent our future. And we hear 3 consistent reasons. And just personally, I've made it my mission to go out to coffee every day to get in front of young people. And here are the 3 things they say. I am leaving because I cannot find housing. The second reason is I grew up here, I left, I wanted to come back here and raise my children with all of my friends, but when I got back, all of my friends were gone because they could not find housing. And the most heartbreaking thing that we hear is Traverse City does not care for their young people. We can do better. We must do better for our young people because our future awaits. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any, to the commission, do you have any clarifying questions you would like to ask of Sean at this point?
I have 2. I just want to check my memory. At one time, I think I heard that in terms of non-conforming
Linda, make sure you're
non-conforming
into the
units that currently exist, there's over 400. Is that correct?
I would have to go back and look. I don't feel comfortable citing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also, at one time, I thought that when we were looking at these initially, that we know that this isn't the answer to the housing crisis and that it would produce probably less than 100 building units, do you think?
That was a number that was stated by a member of the public. They didn't share their methodology or how they came to that conclusion, but that was a number that has been bandied about, so I can't verify for that one. I know, back to your first question, Debbie had asked me that. We have probably 168 non-conforming residential lots. Now, most of the time, those have 2 units or 3 units or 4 units, so that could be where that 400 number came from, but I would feel more comfortable.
I think it was
looking into
initially
it.
on that map
It
with
could
the
be.
overlays.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Could we quickly get a map of the zoning lines so that the audience could like get some reference of where some of these areas are, because they may or may not know where the R2, for instance, happens to be throughout. And then, while that's being pulled up, I have another question about the enforcement, looking towards getting magistrate support and start issuing tickets. Where does it go from there? I mean, there's no point of reference for, how much are those tickets? How many tickets does somebody get before what,
Yeah, so that's a question that Lauren and I, the city attorney, have been having, and I think you tried to have a meeting set up with the magistrate to discuss some of these items, and it's getting rescheduled. Typically, the ticket is $500, and every day of the offense is a new offense. Most of the time, what we have to go off of is documented stays on the rental websites, and so if we see that they had 4 in the month of May, then we can write for 4 tickets. Now, it's up to the magistrate's discretion what they will assess them, essentially. We had a frustrating case recently where someone was a repeat offender. We had the ticket. They requested a informal hearing, I think is what it called, and it all got thrown out because there was a typo on the paperwork. So there's those type of things that we're dealing with. But Laura and I have had that discussion in the past. Like, if we get a repeat offender, and again, up until now, it's finding them with evidence has been the problem, then I think we can go to the court and ask for an injunction. And then if they continue violating, now they're violating court order. I don't know.
That's right. So the initial tickets would be $500, and then we would have the opportunity as well to ask for formal hearings if that's not working, and injunctive relief, so,
$500 across the board
Every day.
per day.
per day. Have
Is
we
there a
come-
warning letter before that $500 fine? Is that how that goes?
There is.
Yeah. And have we come across instances where they're charging more than that? So they're still not losing money by just paying the ticket?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Yes, Tim?
And I apologize when my computer started talking before. I was trying to pull up that map that you
Yeah.
have there. On page 29 of your, that you've numbered page 29, I think the R1A and R1B were flipped because as far as the footnote. So the footnote goes with R1A as far as base of the peninsula.
The 35 and 45 foot?
No, that's for the R1B portion at the base of the peninsula.
So
So,
I'm saying, but like I live in R1B in central neighborhood,
mhm.
and I'm currently 45 feet is the lot minimum. And 35 feet is what's proposed.
He acknowledged that those were
Yeah.
converted.
He flipped them.
Oh, yeah, I did have those flip-flopped on there.
You currently
Okay.
have 45 feet, and it's being proposed to go to 35 feet.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that was a mistake. He did identify that. Probably while you were trying to find the map. And it was talking to you.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, clarifying questions for Sean?
Yeah.
Mitch?
I was in the way.
Yes, you said that these restrictions don't allow any new short-term rentals. Could you clarify for the audience how either the state or the city defines short-term rentals as opposed to other lease structures, and what zoning categories we have a minimum lease length, for example, on?
So we define short-term rental as a period less than 30 days. So anything above a month is considered long-term rental. The only residential use that we have that has a defined lease period is an ADU, which is 90 days.
Thank you.
Yep.
And if I remember correctly, when we were going through the short-term rental discussion, I mean, the 30-day period has been on the books for a long time, that anything over 30 days is considered long-term. Correct? I
That's
think it's
as
been
I
there for a
understand
very
it,
long
yeah.
time. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, I think you've been pretty distinct about what's out there, and it's, of course, you do. And in the packet, you can see the red line version of all this for each of the ordinances, but this is the overview. I would ask folks to take a look at it when they get the chance and to go back and look at it. Did you have something you wanted to
I was just going to note, before you open up for public comment, if that's where we're heading, just keep in mind, we have the delay between the two rooms.
Yeah.
So however you want to handle it's fine, but just keep in mind, it's about 20, 30-second delay,
Okay.
folks.
Can I ask that we have commission a discussion before we open it up to the public?
Well, I thought that's what we were doing
Yeah,
here.
that's
Okay.
fine.
Oh, I
Well-
thought we were just asking questions of Sean.
Okay, well, I'll go through
First
through my part of it now then. Okay. First of all, as I mentioned before, we will not make any decisions tonight, formal decisions. We may have a discussion, there may be some consensus, but what we're going to think about. But any formal decisions has to be made at a regular public meeting. So the question that I'm going to be overall suggesting that we be asking ourselves at our September 5th regular meeting, does the commission wish to proceed? That was there, he mentioned to it, and that was up to us. If the answer is yes, I think it gets down to that we got to remember that, this body has probably at best 2 extra months until which we need to finish doing our regular business, because we won't meet the first meeting in November because of an election. And, and the end of this month is here. So we got September and October. So if we want to complete this process and not leave anything for the next commission to finish, that's our responsibility. That is our responsibility. I don't want to leave anything that all of a sudden we do an introduction and then we're not around to see the final vote. Some of us lived through that, at least two of us lived through that way back when all of a sudden we had a tall building that got delayed, and then probably one of the first meetings we had to deal with was the outrage of a 100-foot building. That's not fair for the new members that are walking in. And I don't want to be the one that all of a sudden just leaves it in their laps and they're going, what if? That's not fair to them. I didn't think it was fair to us at that time, but we had to deal with it, and we did. So my idea is here, if we were to do that, at the best, we should think about having an introduction, if we are going to move forward with an introduction on about September the 18th, and then give it a month for more discussion and possible adoption on October the 16th. That's kind of an idea, but is not held up. We have the choices that we can determine if we wish to consider all the proposals or the selected amendments. I think you saw them. If you look at the brief slides, we have an amendment number 1, which will allow up to 4 dwelling units in the R2 district. And if I remember that right, they have to be somewhere look like a house on the property. So it's not like you get 4 squares and that's it. It's got to look more something like that. Amendment 2 would allow duplexes by right in the R1 A and B district. Amendment number 3 is to reduce minimum lot size to 1 acre for clustered housing. The other big item that was underneath there is that the City Commission, the approval for City Commission SLUP approval would be changed to have an administrative SLUP removal. Amendment number 4 will allow 2 principal dwellings in the R1A district on lots that are twice the minimum area. Amendment number 5, reduce minimum lot width area and increase impervious surface limits. So while you may be able to get a couple in there, you're still going to have to deal with more impervious surface, which is more than what's being done now. And then amendment number 6 is, of course, to modify the ADU requirements. I think there are 3 major points in there, which is the removal of the annual cap, allow with duplexes in an R1A and duplex and triplexes in the R2, and we also remove the owner occupancy requirement. Now we can either take all of them or part of them or none of them. If the answer is no, we do not wish to proceed, then the amendments do not go back to the Planning Commission, nor do we refer to the next City Commission. Basically, the amendments die unless the next City Commission wishes to undertake it. And my only recommendation to them, as someone that has watched new commissions come in, do not take anything heavy or controversial up for at least until after January 1st. You take your office in the second Monday in November, and you need to give yourself time to be as a working group. And that's just a recommendation from someone that's watched this for quite some time in our community, and I would say that anywhere I'm at for new people coming in. And we know there are going to be at least 2 new members that will be coming in. So with that, if you'd like to have some discussion, then we're going to open it up to public comment. So those are my thoughts and my words of wisdom for whatever they may be worth, which is probably very little. So there you go.
Mitch and I have sat on the Planning Commission and this commission, and certainly have read hundreds of letters from people and attended meetings. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. And it makes me sad what's happened in the community where the worst case scenario stories just kept getting told over and over again, so that people are really panicked about some of these things in a way that I think is unfortunate. When I moved to Texas and saw a giant cockroach for the first time, I was horrified. And my way of dealing with that was to talk to people about how I was afraid of cockroaches, and everybody told me their worst cockroach story. And so then I just had all these images of cockroaches hanging in my mouth. Anyway, I kind of feel like that's what happened here, that the stories just kept getting more and more heated and more distorted from what was intended. And so I'm nervous about being able to move forward in an informed way, not just based on heat and emotion. And so as I look at this and think about the history of what I've heard, even one of the planning commissioners who left their post said on the day we were talking about this, I agree with 80% of these. And I would like to see that 80%, and in the numbers we were given today, they're different than the numbers I had. It's basically 1, which is the 4 dwellings, and 2, the duplexes by right, maybe, and 3, the reducing area for cluster housing, and 4, the 2 homes on a twice as big lot, and 5, reducing the minimum area and width. Those, I think, can move forward without any problem. We go back to the situation that has been the situation from day one, and that is the owner occupancy question. And while I know that the logic is it's not fair to ask one group of homeowners to have one set of rules and another set of homeowners to have another set of rules, I just feel like where we are as a community right now, it doesn't do any of us any good to not revisit that. And so in my head, it's eliminate the cap on ADUs. I'm perfectly fine with that. But keep what we currently have. Don't change that. What we have is owner occupancy on that requirement. And I'm comfortable with that. It's the only way we got ADUs passed in the first place. And I was part of that discussion as well. And so if the community feels more comfortable with that, as a body, I would like to suggest that we consider that as well. As far as duplexes in R1 neighborhoods, by right, I think that's great. But again, the question came up, what do you do about the ADU, which is now allowed there as well? And I think this is a place where we could give a carrot. If you're going to build a duplex and you want an ADU, then some owner has to be on that property and use it as an incentive. Otherwise, you can just build a duplex. And again, I think that quiets a lot of the fears that I'm hearing and reading about from residents. The other thing that I think comes up, so is that all the owner-occupied things? I think that's the owner-occupied thing. So the other thing that comes up repeatedly is I don't want a huge monolith being built next to my home, and understandably so. I have never been, I think I saw Janet Fleischman here, she and I went around on this on the Planning Commission. I'm not a big person who wants building standards necessarily or design standards. I like the older homes next to the California-style flat roof homes. I like that. I think it makes for a more interesting community. But I do think we could do, and I don't know where this happens. I think it goes back to planning. But I would like to see perhaps form-based standards for all the new buildings where we have maybe the pitched roof is the 35-foot, which is what it currently is, and our square roofs or our flat roofs are 20 feet. And if you do that, then you have a much less mass next to you within a neighborhood. So something like that, and again, planners should talk about that more than me. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but I think it could work. Also, I think about, and again, listening to people, maybe we extend the lease on ADUs to 6 months, from 3 months to 6 months. Maybe that helps, because 3 months is kind of the summer. And if we say 6 months, it's not. I'd like to see, the rental inspections is interesting to me. That's come up a lot, but as you indicate, it's a violation of our city charter, and so we'd have to deal with that as well. Yeah. That's where I am right now. Oh, higher penalties for STRs, absolutely, is what I'd like to see as well.
Ms. Shamrock.
First of all, I'm just going to say, let's not bring SDRs into this right now, because that's a whole other discussion and a whole other matter that we have to bring forward. Not that I'm not against it, but lest we muddy the waters and it get out through somebody saying something, they were talking about short-term rentals, that has nothing to do with this zoning. But I wanted to say too that I appreciate the work of the Planning Commission and our commissioners up here and our planning commission, or our planning director. You know, I heard a lot of people saying following the process, and this is the process. That's why a body that's citizen appointed doesn't make the final call, we do. And so that's the difference. We're the politicians, we're gonna tear this apart, we're gonna maybe go against best practices or standard practices because it's not what's going to fit our city at this moment. And I think that's where I've kind of landed as I've been following this discussion as it's now before us. I agree with Linda about the not eliminating the owner occupancy for the ADUs. I was up here when we passed the change in the ADU limit. I'd like to see the cap go away, but at that time we had a lot of conversations about granny flats, and that's really how I still think of them in my head. And I know that they're mostly used for family members or long-term rentals for people who are looking for housing. And I have a great story. We talked about bad stories. I have a great story about somebody who has had a house in Slabtown for decades now. And when her daughter and her boyfriend moved back here to take jobs, she's actually renting an ADU half down the block from where she grew up. And so they get to see each other all the time. It's a great way to live in the neighborhood without having a huge impact. So, but they're full-time rentals. I would be okay keeping the 90 days though, because like it or not, we do have nurses and things who come here for not full contracts for 6 months. Maybe some people are willing to live in an ADU for 3 months through the summer and come back and forth on the weekends, but then they're part of your community. That happens in my place, and that happens in a lot of places where people have the 30-day rental minimum. Not a lot, though. So that's kind of where I've landed on that. I'm also with the former planning commissioner and Linda herself here, that there are some good things in here that I don't think will terribly tear apart the fabric that's in the cities and in a lot of our neighborhoods already. During COVID, until a foot injury for about 2 years, I walked every neighborhood many times a week, because what else was there to do? I wish I would go back to doing it now. I need to be healthier like that. But there's a lot of tucked away ADUs and multi-unit dwellings that people don't even notice because they are in your neighborhood. The only way you can tell most of the time is there's mailboxes on the front, right? There's more than one mailbox. And so I think that us having this discussion to allow for more of these are going to be helping a little bit. I've heard this will raise housing prices. Traverse City already has some of the highest prices in the state. Adding more to it, the only place we've seen some weakness in the market is actually the short-term rental housing. The stuff in the commercial districts lost some value because that market's kind of maxed out around here. So I don't know that a couple more duplexes over the next 10 years, because by the time you buy property that has it on it, tear it down, and the cost to tear down and the cost of building, there's not a lot of incentive there now. Will we see some? I'm sure. I saw some go up on 8th Street a few years ago in the more commercial part where there had been a dilapidated house that was literally falling down. Every time I talk about it, even at my own neighborhood association meeting in Traverse Heights, people couldn't even remember that they were there. And so I guess I would just say, kind of a little bit to Linda's point, I think that what we're looking at is not to change the fabric of the neighborhood, but to allow some more opportunities that can be added to our zoning without it making a huge impact, because our neighborhoods are beautiful and our neighborhoods are precious. During all that walking, there's so much beauty to enjoy and so many great community moments that you see with people out talking in their front yards and stuff, and we don't want to take that away from people. So I guess I would say I look forward to the discussion on the 5th. There's a couple things that I already do want to take out, but there's some stuff in here that I think isn't bad. So I hope we can come to a consensus and hear more from you all.
First off, I see the discussion is already starting to go through all the different things, but personally I'd like it if we could concentrate on dealing with individual things and have discussion about that, but that's up to my fellow commissioners and the mayor. I would like to say, as somebody that's not just a city commissioner, but also sits on the planning commission, master plan team, Board of Zoning Appeals, I've heard a lot about the impact that these and other proposed changes could have on our neighborhoods and neighborhood character. And I hear, as we see signs out front, people urging us to hit pause. I feel part of the issue here is, and I understand why Director Winter took this approach, that all of these changes were bundled into one package. Some things, like the cluster housing provision, were introduced as draft language a year and a half ago, and the language that we have before us is, as near as I can tell, identical to what I saw. So we essentially paused that for 18 months so that it could be part of a larger thing, but as part of that larger thing, it's not like it got any more attention. Of the 100+ emails that I've gotten, probably hundreds of emails, I searched through all of them today, and only 3 of them mention cluster housing in any detail, and the 2 that refer to specific cases that they think are cluster housing, neither of those are actually cluster housing in our zoning code. So by packaging all of these changes into one larger set allows things like that to get lost, things that there may indeed be broad support from the community for, and think, why do we have this regulation, or why don't we allow something that is already part of our built environment in the city? And frankly, if we had allowed some of those things to happen sooner, then we could have had more focused discussion on each of the proposed changes in turn, recognized where there was greater consensus and what changes might be necessary. As it stands as a larger package, it garnered a lot of pushback, especially at the final Planning Commission meeting, where it was, by a large majority, recommended to come to the City Commission without changes. I think at that point in the process, a lot of planning commissioners, including myself, recognized that passing it to the City Commission was not the end of the process, but merely another stage, and there was going to be at least another couple months worth of discussion about it. And they did not want to extend what was already a rather long Planning Commission meeting. But that doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of certain proposed changes that might need some changes to them, some amendments, like whether we're going to change the owner occupancy provision for ADUs, or look at that 3-month lease length as, is that the right length? Or do we want minimum lease lengths for other parts of the city? So I would look forward to having this discussion, since, as the mayor has said, it's disrespectful to future commissions to not finish large pieces of work, and though they weren't presented as draft language, some of these items, as we saw in the opening slides from Director Winter, have been on discussions from as early as 2020, and in fact, they go back to previous sessions of the City and Planning Commission in the goals that they have set as ways to address housing in the area, and what might reflect best practices for the planning world, and also reflect that we do have duplexes that we've allowed in various places in the city that then we changed the zoning code later and decided to disallow them, essentially.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, sir, Timothy.
Yes, we have a housing crisis, and this body and previous city commissions have made housing a top priority. I've lost track of time, maybe 11 years ago when I served on the Planning Commission, one of my first meetings. I don't remember what we were talking about even at the Planning Commission, but Jody Bergman was there still. And she was talking about how she would love it if her, I think at the time, college-age daughter would have an opportunity to move back to Traverse City. And we were talking about the high cost of housing and how it kept going up at that time, and that was 11 years ago, and things have skyrocketed since. And I only bring that up, that this isn't a new conversation, but to emphasize that it really is a crisis. Like, this isn't a, oh, well, let's now spend 3 or 4 years figuring out what we want to do. I do agree with the mayor. We should take the responsibility to approve whatever we can get the votes to approve in the coming months, and set everything else aside, not send it back to planning and not put it on the next city commission. I do like what I heard from Linda Colbert, and I'm ready to fully support wherever the consensus is to move things forward.
I also wanted to say that, and I've said this to some people in letters, we are not planning a city for people who look like me and many of you. We're planning a city for people who look like you. And that's important for all of us to remember. What we are comfortable with isn't what the next generation is going to have. We received a letter from someone I know is kind, and it was all the reason why home ownership is better than renting. I'm sure there are a lot of 20 and 30 and 40-year-olds who would love to own a house, but we didn't make that possible for them. We stuck them with high student debt, high housing costs, now high interest rates. It's not that they're choosing not to or to upset you because they have to rent. It's because that's the world they've been given, and that's who we're planning for here. So you have to try and tamp down, what we were used to and what we valued, because that's not the way ahead. The other thing I wanted to say is that if you look up this list of zoning amendment recommendations, they are all over the country. And what we have tried to do here is to do this very heavy lift in a town, and what a lot of places are doing is passing it at the state level. And so I know everybody here thinks that Traverse City is the most special and historic and charming place, but there are other places. I've lived in Vermont. It's more historic and more charming, and they passed it at the state level. They didn't make Middlebury and all the individual towns do it themselves. They said this is right. And what's right isn't always popular, what's popular isn't always right, and they did it at the state level. And so I know this is a heavy lift. I know this is hard. I know the arguments you have written to us you think are unique. Those arguments are being heard all over the country. We got a letter today from someone who just moved here from someplace in Virginia, and he said exact same arguments. And if you read the articles about the other states or cities that have tried to do this, these are very familiar things that are being said. So that's my little sermonette for today. Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to acknowledge the time that everyone who has reached out to us and sent us your concerns, your questions, your feedback about these proposed amendments. We've literally gotten hundreds of them. I know the Planning Commission has received hundreds more. And I want to acknowledge that of the 7 city commissioners, the majority of us grew up here. 3 of the 4 of us were born and raised here, myself included. We have no interest in destroying our community or destroying our neighborhoods. We value that. I know at least a couple of us moved away and came back to be near our families, and it was very difficult to do that. I have elderly parents with health issues, and if my husband hadn't bought our home as his bachelor pad in 2013, I would still be living in another state. I want to really make clear that I hold the concerns of the younger generation who want to be here, who grew up here, who want to come back here, alongside the concerns of the people who have lived here continuously for the last 40 to 60 years. And I promise you, everyone sitting up here this evening wants to do what is right for our community and what is best for not just the people who live here, but the people who are desperate to return to be near their families. There was a gentleman at one of the first meetings after the Planning Commission meeting who came up and spoke about why do we care more about people who don't live here but want to live here than we do about the people who live here and pay taxes here and just want their neighborhoods to stay the same. And just as he was running out of time in his public comment, he mentioned that when he moved here, however many decades ago, he chose to move here because it was such a wonderful community. And that really brought home to me that at some point in time, unless you were born and raised here, you wanted to move here. And I think, to Commissioner Treadwell's point, some of this being bundled together the way that it's been we've kind of lost the forest for the trees. And I think Commissioner Cobert's recommendations are very sensible and reasonable. And I see as a path forward breaking these apart into some of those modifications that will be gentle and not so much it's not such a heavy lift. So, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone's had their opportunity. Thank Ms. Hershey, this is at the at the city commission level, so at
Okay.
this point, I'm going to have to ask you to wait for a public comment, and I'll let you go first. Is
Okay.
that okay? Thank you. I'm trying to keep, not a major wall, but something of a wall. Okay. Thank you, because I had on my notes here to ask your all's first glances. You've given them. Thank you very much. So be prepared for, on the 5th, that we'll have further discussion and weed this down for how we want to proceed.
And that's what I was going to ask about, is the dates again, because I've heard September 18th, but I've heard September 5th, both as introduction with October as possible.
The September the 5th is for us to make a go or no-go.
Just to discuss, okay.
Yeah, and because that's when we have to make an official decision. And then hopefully we'll get an introduction on the 18th, and we'll have a month to wrestle it through. Just because we give an introduction and a possible adoption date doesn't mean anything doesn't happen. A lot of things can happen in between. But again, it's our responsibility that if we wish to proceed, we should proceed and finish this before this body. It's almost like the United States Congress. This term of the City Commission ends November the 13th or somewhere in that part. So,
Thanks for the clarification.
okay, that's it.
So I'm not hearing any support for no-go. Do
Well,
we
I-
really
I
need
haven't heard-
another meeting for
I just
that?
said it out there.
Okay.
I just said that's what we have to think about. So I haven't heard that either.
Yeah.
But that decision will be made on the 5th, one way or the other. Okay? I'm going to open this for public comment. As mentioned before, we have received numerous, and that goes with large sums of, probably well over 100, probably 200 emails that we have received. Of course, the large majority of those have questioned the zoning changes, and some of them in some of the areas in more particular details, but a lot of them just says we don't want any. So, and that's okay. There's also been emails that have supported these proposed amendments that have come from, I know you saw them identified, but they're also the major folks in this town that are looking, how do they bring the young professionals here to live and to raise a family like much of us did when we came. So, we are asking, we're going to open this for public comment, and I'm sorry I can't be in the back room and see how many people raise their hands back there, especially when they got to wait 20 seconds. But how many folks in here are going to want to speak on this tonight? Please raise your hands. Okay. Okay, and I'll wait for a second. I'll wait and see what he sees back there.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
while we're paused, is it up to the county, or is the city allowed to change the screensaver on these screens? So we can put images of the bay?
I was gonna say, I think Microsoft rotates
Tied
it.
to Microsoft's laptop.
I've had that come up on my own computer periodically.
Thank you.
That's got to go.
Take a picture of the bay.
It's
might be
lovely.
nice.
Poor Joe.
You don't want to go to Tuscany?
Oh, I do.
We have our own wineries. We do not need theirs.
This is true.
At least that's what it
We
says
need them
on
all.
It is, you can thumbs it up or thumbs it down.
Okay. And a glass of Chardonnay, Cabernet, Sauvignon.
Sauvignon.
Tuscan.
Never mind. Okay. Quite a few? Okay. Anyway, what I'm going to ask the question is that we also have, as this body has another very important decision that we have to make tonight that we're going to need to take some time on. And I'm hoping that all of you will be quick into your responses. I don't know whether I want to limit it to 2 minutes instead of the 3 minutes, because we're going to have to go into closed session because we have to make some decisions as it relates to our next city manager. And I prefer to go into that one also not being totally brain dead when I walk in there, if you can expect that, because that's going to affect you guys even more than this may if we don't get the right choices. Please note that you will have the opportunity to speak before we take any action on the 5th for public comment. We will make sure that that happens. So if you want to wait until that night, you're more than welcome to. You can do them both nights, but if you want to wait till then, and so you at least understand what it is we're going to be considering or not, that's your call to make. So with that, you already heard the rules for public comment. I'm going to start out with 3 minutes, but please try to, and if someone comes up and you disagree with them, you can get up and just give your name and say, I agree. That's fine. That'll be work. Thank you.
Also, one additional note, please keep, if you're not at the podium, keep your commentary and applause to yourself so we can keep this moving along.
We're saying just don't do it.
Just don't do it.
Also, let's keep it to the topic. Leave personalities out of it, please.
Did you want to lead with Debbie Hershey?
Oh, let me lead with Debbie because I told her she could. No, you can
want me to
stay
go
right
over
there.
there?
Rick, just stay right where you are.
Can I stay here?
Yes.
I'm Debbie Hershey. I live at the Midtown Condominiums, Traverse City resident. I'm going to be very quick. This is piggybacking on Commissioner Colbert's comments about how some things have gotten very big in the story. And as a planning commissioner, one of the things, and this is my perspective, that I just want to say is this business of bundling, packaging. I always saw this as we were tasked with finding solutions. We gave you a menu of solutions to choose from. Maybe you would choose all, maybe you wouldn't. So I don't agree with this term of bundling or packaging or the other words that are being said.
Blanket has showed up in a lot of.
Yes.
All right.
Thank
Also,
you.
to expedite our discussion tonight, if y'all can start lining up over here. Those in the back room, you'll have to wait 20 seconds before you'll hear that, but come on out and come on down to here, and you can line up and get ready to get started. So we thank you very much for your patience. Mr. Buckhalter, good evening, sir.
Good evening. Rick Buckholder, 932 Kelly Street. I'm a Traverse City resident. At the beginning of the meeting, when you're talking about public comment, you asked that everybody treat everybody with respect. But I have to say, 2 women that spoke tonight up there had pretty much a condescending and pretentious opinion. And we're talking down to city residents who didn't agree with them. Secondly, I'd like to point out the way the state law is, since it was mentioned that supposedly the Planning Commission's been working on this for 2 years, that city residents cannot remove planning commissioners, and even the city commission, once appointed, can't remove a planning commissioner unless they do something heinous. We can't do anything about the current planning director.
Let's say,
And
go to the topic, please, of the amendments, please.
To the amendment, this is blanket zoning. You have no idea the consequences of your actions. You have not discussed it. There are no specific points. You have no idea, as I said, what the outcome will be. And this is massive blanket zoning. And the people on the zoning commission, or the planning commission, excuse me, supposedly they have the talent to solve the tasks that are given to them. And it's clear this group doesn't. If you want to solve housing issues, you need to ask these people to resign and get some people in with the talent to solve the problem.
Stay to the topic, please, to the amendments that we're considering.
Amendments you're considering may lead to a lawsuit. Secondly, I'd like to point out that I have asked the city clerk several times about doing a protest petition to present to you as the law dictates before you vote on it, at the meeting and you vote on it. And I've never gotten any feedback on the specifics of what the petition, specifically titled a protest petition, has to contain. Problem number 1. Problem number 2, the city clerk's office does not have the capability to solve the problem, to verify the petition that all the signers, in fact, are city property owners. So we are not allowed to do a protest petition to try to influence you to not vote for this when you get to the point where you do that. So we're just getting stuffed. Thank you.
That's really high up there. Hi, my name's Anna Deturi, 340 East State Street. I am a current planning commissioner, so that is going to be a tough act to follow. I'm also here on behalf of just my own residency. I am also the vice chair of planning, newly elected, so I appreciate you, Debbie, and being my teammate. So, oh, I'm not going to cry. Okay. Thank
Yes,
you
you
so
are.
much for taking up these amendments in this session, in this study session specifically, but in this election specifically. As you may know, housing has been one of the city and planning commission's goals for years. Every single year, in fact, that I've been on planning since 2019, like spring of 2019. I'm just one example, one story. Okay. I am born and raised in Traverse City. My father is directly behind me, which is probably why I'm crying. I rent currently a 700 square foot apartment a block and a half from here. I wanted to live downtown. My rent for that 700 square foot apartment is $1,750, which they claim is market rate. That rent is 35.8% of my income. I am just beneath the 2020 census in terms of the median income in Traverse City. One day I hope to become a homeowner in this city, but until we pass at least the majority of these recommendations that we proposed for you, which are in alignment with national standards, this will not be attainable for me or folks in a similar situation such as myself. Every young person that I talk to is struggling and contemplating a move. I've had numerous friends leave the area. I'm 33 years old and I would love to have friends in the area that stay. I don't want to be one of them. I don't want to move away. Frankly, the city doesn't want to lose all of us either, because who will cook your food and tend your shops and run your cafes? We cannot plan around the past. We have to look forward to the future and what the future generations want without assuming to know what they want. I'll tell you what I want. I want to be afforded, at a minimum, the same rights that past generations were in this city when it comes to home ownership. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Forster, 11008 Southwest Bayshore Drive. I am not a city resident, but I represent an interfaith organization called SALT, Spiritual Activists Leading Together, and we are an interfaith organization that represents faith communities that include faith communities that are in the city of Traverse City. And so we have picked up affordable housing within our community as a prime issue that we are focusing on. And we want to just thank you for taking up this issue and looking at it and being willing to wrestle with all the complexities that go along with it. The previous public commenters' comments strike a chord within my heart. As we're trying to organize young people and folks to go behind this effort of affordable housing, it's quite simply difficult to find young people within the city of Traverse City to organize to be here. And that's representative of how expensive it is to live within the city. Everybody deserves a right to have a safe home to live in. That is a core principle of the values of the diverse faiths that are represented in SALT. And that's simply not possible within the city of Traverse City right now. And so we encourage you to continue to go in and look at these zoning requirements, but we encourage you to keep looking into this issue. That this is a large package that I know that is difficult and a heavy lift. That terminology has been used several times. But keep looking at other incentives. We have a whole community of people who simply do not have access to homes, and that's unacceptable within our city of Traverse City, and I know we all feel that as well. So thank you for the work that you continue to do, and we just encourage you that there are faith leaders here who are supporting the work that you are all doing. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Amanda Siggins, and I am not a city resident, but I do represent 2 organizations in Traverse City that I work for. I have 2 jobs here. One addresses housing and one addresses homelessness within the Traverse City area. And aside from the housing and the situation where young people can't afford to live in Traverse City, I would just like to mention that right before I came here, I had a meeting with a person who is a homeless person and has gone through now 2 rounds of homeless or housing choice vouchers, and has both times lost the vouchers due to the fact that he has given vouchers to find housing in Traverse City, and there are no places to rent within the allowable limits of the housing choice voucher. And I know that Traverse City tourism is important, community is important here, but the homelessness situation in Traverse City is not going to go away unless the housing situation is addressed. And I think that these zoning amendments to the rule for the communities in Traverse City will not only allow young people and young professionals to live in the area, but it will allow people to no longer have to live on the streets and die in the streets of Traverse City because there's no houses for them to rent and to live in. Thank you.
Greetings, Commissioners and Mr. Mayor. My name is Heather Shaw. I have lived at 655 West Orchard Drive for 22 years. I am a former Planning Commissioner and also a candidate for City Commission. And I hope that tonight you've seen, not only tonight, but the last 2 months, you've seen that each one of these 6 proposed amendments need individualized attention and deliberation. Introduced individually, the Commission and TC residents won't feel overwhelmed or rushed or outraged. And hopefully, everyone can ask better questions that will result in some consensus and better solutions. The big question at the top of the heap is, will these proposed amendments fill an actual need? For instance, how many middle-income families want to live in a small apartment or an alley-side ADU? Because we are talking about, that's what TC Connect wants. This is what our area business wants. They want middle-income families, correct? How about with 55% of the current population being 55 or older, how many of these residents want to live in or move to a small apartment or a backyard ADU? We know that other cities that have implemented these blanket zoning changes experience skyrocketing property values and taxes, gentrification and loss of green spaces. How will those facts impact our current neighborhood stability and our sense of community? There's more. What happens if we do nothing in our neighborhoods and rather work to add housing along city corridors that are already zoned for growth? What would that housing look like? Who would want to live there? These questions deserve time for discussion, debate, and consensus. Strong Towns, a nonprofit organization that studies urban development, says, I think wisely, number 1, don't wait for a crisis to make change. 2, find common ground and build on it. 3, listen, learn, and then take the next smallest step. City and Planning acted correctly by compiling a package of common zoning changes used in other communities to increase housing opportunities, but that's just the first step. I hope that the City Commission will decide to break out the amendments and follow through on steps 2 and 3. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. I am Commission Candidate Jackie Anderson. I live at 1725 Comanche Street. The Planning Commission would like you to roll the dice. Take a shot. The density zoning will have no negative impact on our neighborhoods, our infrastructure, our environment.
Please address the issue, not what the Planning
I
Commission
am,
believes.
sir, and our quality of life. The truth is that the results of density zoning in a community as small as Traverse City are simply untested. No studies, no evidence, no proof, and the data from larger communities who have adopted density zoning shows minimal growth in the supply of housing while prices continue to skyrocket. So please, let's slow this down. Complete our master plan first, so we have a shared vision for our future. Separate these 6 zoning proposals that are before you. Study them individually until you can accurately forecast the impact. And finally, please focus your energy and budgets on the most urgent housing needs in Traverse City. Homes for our homeless citizens, for working families, and for first-time buyers. Thank you.
Hi, Sam LaSousa, 152 East 14th Street, Traverse City. I'm a Traverse City resident. I just wanted to first of all thank the Commission and the Planning Commission and the Director of Planning for all of their work that they've been doing on this. I want to share a good story with you guys. But I do want to remind everybody that I am an anomaly. So I actually live in a development that is very similar to the types of development that they're talking about here. And it is the only reason that I was able to move back to Traverse City, a city that I grew up in, to be close to family. So I am the example of who could be living in Traverse City if we allow this type of zoning to be rewritten and amended. I'm a small business owner. I work for a nonprofit in town. I help manage the Sarah Hardy Farmers Market. I started my own nonprofit that addresses loneliness in town. I do a number of different things. I'm a community builder here. And the woman that owns the home that shares a lot with me is a nurse at Munson. So that's the type of people that are allowed to be here and the capacity that they're building by allowing us to live in this community. We wouldn't be able to live there had our lot not been rezoned and parceled out and built by a developer into 2 homes on 1 lot. So without that type of housing, I never would have had the opportunity to move home. Just about 3 years later, I probably couldn't afford the house that I currently live in as well. So in the amount of time that I've lived back in Traverse City in my hometown, it has become out of reach for me currently. I work in a number of different capacities and offer a lot to our area, and I'd love to see other young people be able to do what I do. Commonly in the nonprofit that I work for and have started, I have 2, sorry, it gets confusing. I constantly hear of people not being able to find affordable housing. It's a reason that we lose talent at the nonprofit that I work for, and it's a reason that we started the nonprofit that I started, was to try and retain people in our area and build community here. I just hope that you guys will address this crisis with the urgency that it needs to be, because housing is a life or death issue in our climate and in our area, and it needs to be addressed with that level of urgency. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Commissioners, for taking up this important issue. My name is Mike Goodall. I'm a Traverse City resident. My primary home is 703 South Union Street. I'm also a small business owner with my wife and Angela and I. We own 420 South Division Street. That is the business location, as well as recently purchased a rental property within the city limits, and that's 117 East 16th Street. I'm for all of the proposals as submitted. I'm especially in agreement with lifting the owner occupancy, and the reason being is that particular rental house that we had purchased, we actually bought that just simply so that we could hire employees that wanted to move to the area that weren't able to find housing. We currently rent to one of our new talented designers, and it's a small rental, and the lot is large enough and would fit this criteria for us to build an ADU, which is our plan. The owner occupancy, though, wouldn't really make it viable for what we would like to use that for, and that's provide more rental housing for employees moving to the area. If there was some other way to accomplish this without taking the, without requiring the owner occupancy on these ADUs, if there's possibly another way to look at it, possibly an owner still living within the city limits, or some other option where there's a means for maybe an exception. That would be one thing that I would like to see the commission approach if that's possible. thank you very much, and thank you for the great work.
Hello, my name is Nicole Hewlett. I live at 1920 South Quail Court, and I've lived there for 20-plus years. Also a graduate of Traverse City, so a local. I also have a rental unit that I rent out long-term, but it's a 3-month minimum, and that's at 525 Riverine. And where I use that is people who are coming in, because I come from the real estate world, people who are coming into town, or people who live here who are looking for a place to live. It's a temporary place for them to hold their hat while they find a residence to stay at, and I found that that's worked out very well. I just recently ran into a single woman who has been trying to figure out how to find a place, and it took her a while, so she stayed in my place until she found a place. And then I have a daughter that lives out of state now, that when she comes into town, I like her to be able to stay there when she's there, because my home is small for her to stay in. So for me, having the option of the 3-month minimum is beneficial instead of renting it year-round, because if I rent it year-round, then I can't have my daughter stay there, which is helpful. So I like how that 3-month minimum is good, and it's not used for any other reason except for that. And then I also want to say that I know several people that are looking at all of this right now that are locals and lived here a long time, young couples that are trying to figure out how to work their property to where they can stay here. An instance of somebody who lives on 9th Street, they're trying to do an ADU so that they can stay here. If they can't figure out the ADU, they might have to sell and possibly move out. So it's just a helpful way for them to figure out how to work their property for them. And these are the 3 people that I know that are doing this right now are all locals trying to keep it here. So that helps, I think, keep the locals in the area too, to give them opportunities with their property. Also, older people who may have families that have lived in a home, they might have passed away their parents, but then it's inherited down, and they want to keep that property, but then also offer their kids to be able to stay there. That's another example that I'm hearing out there that they're working at right now. So these are all locals who are trying to stay here. It's not, so I think the supply and demand, it's helping those people keep their property rights and things to do with their homes, and it's not turning commercial and all that kind of stuff that people are worried about. So that's my thanks for your time.
Hello, my name is Taryn Endish, and I live in Kingsley, Michigan. And I would just like to, first off, just applaud the first woman who gave her comment and her courage that it took to stand here and deliver that to a room and a protest full of people. But a little bit about me and my story. I work in the nonprofit sector, dedicating my time to connecting frontline communities to the vital work of environmental activism. I'm committed to creating positive change for those who need it most. A lot of my time is spent talking with constituents on the doors. I'm actually knocking doors, tons and tons of doors. And the number one thing they talk about is housing. That is the number one thing I'm hearing from these people. However, the reality is that I, like many others, cannot afford to live within the districts I serve. I wear multiple hats: a full-time salaried professional, a part-time college student, a devoted activist, a student club leader, and even a part-time dog sitter. I have faced homelessness, and I know firsthand the struggles that come with it. And I know what some of you guys are thinking. Just get a better job, or maybe demand they pay me more. Hey, I agree with this one, trust me. But unfortunately, being a 19-year-old with no education yet, or previous prevalent work experience, it doesn't really mean I can get an amazing job right off the bat, or maybe work more. I worked hard to get to a place where I'm able to afford a 40-hour work week. Before this, I was working 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week just to survive. Crazy thing was, I still had to use the NMC food pantry. Before that, I was working more hours way back in college, taking 18 credits and working full-time overnights. I slept on average 3 hours a day, and let's not ask to see my GPA. Why am I telling you all of this? It's important to understand that the barriers to affordable housing affect individuals from all walks of life, including those who work tirelessly for the betterment of this community. And the truth is, I was facing homelessness around every corner during those times. I couldn't sleep, maybe because I was working. My hair started to actually turn gray, but I dyed it now, so don't worry. I am sure almost every single local Airbnb apartment owner got at least one phone call from me during while I was staring down the barrel of becoming houseless. It's a stress that I can't even begin to put into words. How could I focus on cell biology when the cold reality of sleeping in my car loomed over me? I share my journey to shed light on the gravity of the housing crisis. Working more hours is not a simple fix when you're already working tirelessly. Pursuing a degree becomes a daunting challenge when every hour is allocated to survival. I long for a better job, but the opportunities are obviously limited for someone in my situation. If anyone is hiring a 19-year-old with no degree starting at 6 figures, let me know. The housing crisis is more than an inconvenience. It's eroding our community, undermining our education system, and affecting our overall well-being. Their proposed zoning amendments hold a lifeline of hope for individuals like me, who strive to contribute to our community's growth while facing overwhelming housing barriers. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bill O'Toole. I live at 1917 Seneca Street. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks. I guess the key item I want to emphasize is, one, there has to be a communication story on this to the town, because a lot of the misinformation is going out there on this. I would say that, generally speaking, this is really going to be a significant impact to the city. And I would say, as far as its complexion, how it's viewed and things of that nature. But I guess I'm also interested in some type of SWOT type analysis, not only the positives that would come out of this, but there are negatives as far as impacts to infrastructure. I myself is interested in what's going to happen with the taxing base. Some comments I heard from other people that this is a drive for revenue. Typically, other cities I've come from, they've annexed other properties to grow their city. I know you can't do that here, but in any case, I think the story out there is certainly very important. I understand the workforce housing is a significant issue, but I think you also have to be looking at what our other townships surrounding us are doing, and not make, this way we would be a lot of synergies around us rather than some potential duplication. So I appreciate the time, and thank you.
Good evening. I am Caroline Kennedy, 1925 Seneca Street, right next door to Bill. So just a few observations I'd like to share. The least favorite changes that I've noticed in the neighborhoods, and including my neighborhood, is the purchase of the smaller, older properties that go up for sale, and then when they are purchased, they're built out to, what appears to me to be the maximum allowable lot size. And what comes with that, as Linda had said, it's like that monolith. Nobody wants that big monolith next door. And some of these are not duplexes. Well, none of them are that I know of. And so what you get that negative impact that you don't want, and you don't even get the benefit of any additional residents on the property. And I think that degrades the value of the neighborhood. The other thing it does is it makes that home no longer attainable for the middle class. And so it continues that gentrification, and it doesn't allow for any additional people on the same amount of land. And so I think when we see that happening, that's not a good solution, and that's not helpful. So even though everything that we're grappling with here on these different zoning and the amount of emotion and things it brings to people, I think we just have to stop and look a little closer, because what's happening already is not a good solution, and it's not working. So it's not good. A couple other little things. In my little neighborhood, we've got infrastructure, water, sewer issues. We've got water infiltration into our sewer lines. We're all afraid to flush our toilets in the winter. It's on the hierarchy of needs in the neighborhood, that kind of comes first. It's hard to have your neighbors have a bigger heart about who should be moving in and things like that when your own facilities aren't working properly. So there's some back homework to be done, and that's an uphill climb for some of the city, right? But I'm going to get back to design standards for a second, because that's when we're talking about the monoliths and we're talking about, ooh, I don't want a duplex next to me. People are picturing these horrible, blocky, very cheaply, maybe concrete stamped outside building, you know, because we don't have design standards here. And when you look at what's been built recently, I mean,
Thank you.
sorry, there's no trust. So we need that.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Mueller. I'm a city resident, 503 Monroe Street. And I'm proud to say, at my age, I'm a lifelong learner. And I commend all of you, because this is a complex issue. And I compliment you that you've spent a lot of time studying this. I just started studying this. I think it's because of this discussion has brought awareness for me, and I'm kind of learning from this. And I want to kind of bring in and piggyback off of something that Commissioner Colbert said about cockroaches. She said when she was in Texas, she was kind of scared of cockroaches. Well, Sunday, Nate Walton over at the Barnes did a whole session on bugs. And he had this beautiful Madagascar cockroach there that you could have petted. And many kids were there and grew to like it. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that I think everyone here in this room realizes that there is a lot of fear out there, kind of like people might look at cockroaches and be afraid of them. So I think education, I heard the gentleman right before me talk about that. I think education is really important. And I think that that's a job that we need to continue doing. And I suspect, listening to some of your feedback, maybe in the paper and that some of the community, maybe we don't get it. Maybe we don't understand it. Maybe we got it wrong. Well, then I kind of want to put it back on you and say, well, can you teach us maybe in a different way? I grew to be pretty comfortable with that cockroach over there at the Barnes. It was quite beautiful. Maybe you can find a different way of helping us understand what you have already learned. So I guess that's the one thing I wanted to say. And the last thing I wanted to say was you flashed up on the screen a lot of allies that you have that support this. And it flashed on so quickly, I don't know, but I appreciate that you do have allies and that they are part of our community, and I think that that's very important. It's a heavy load to have, and you're going to need allies like that. We're going to need allies like that to help educate us and help us understand this complex problem. Thank you.
Good evening, Denny Scrodato, 422 East State Street, resident of the Boardman neighborhood for 30 years. Number one, first and foremost, I hope, as Commissioner Colbert said, you will keep the owner occupancy requirement for ADUs. Number two, as relates to density, I'm a little worried we could see more homes built directly on alleys facing into other people's backyards if some of these amendments pass. There's one at the end of my alley built 5 years ago, and it was referred to as a site condo, even though it's 2 single-family detached homes. Houses should face streets, not alleys, in my opinion. And I hope that more of these site condos won't get squeezed in as part of this package of amendments. Please protect our neighborhoods and our quality of life and ensure that all homes face a street. Number 3, I hope you will keep the SLUP process as it currently is, transparent and open to public hearings, and deny the recommendation to shift it to an administrative approval. And last, number 4, adding density will do nothing to make new dwellings more affordable, so let's all stop pretending it will. If the powers that be were truly concerned about housing our teachers, our nurses, and our firefighters here in Traverse City, they would pay them on a scale equal to their counterparts downstate. That is the real elephant in the room in the conversation about affordable housing. So I wish we would just drop affordable housing out of the conversation completely. Thank you.
Hi, Merrick Roman, 517 3rd Street. Thank you, commissioners, for taking up this hard topic right here, and thanks to the Planning Commission for giving such great data and a great presentation. What I want to echo that I agree with Commissioner Colbert on, I agree with 80% of this. There is a lot of merit to what's going on. The 20% I think should just be left, especially with the non-owner occupied ADUs. What I want to leave you guys with, or talk about, is that mortgage rates are 8%. They're getting higher. We're talking about first-time mortgage originations by the Federal Reserve. The St. Louis Federal Reserve has said that they're at 10-year lows. The thought that we're going to have these zoning amendments pass, we're going to have a bunch of new first-time homeowners are going to, it's not going to happen. Credit card debt's up. Our wages are not keeping pace with inflation. And what are we, when we're talking about trying to alter the DNA of our zoning ordinances, what are we doing to incentivize our developers to make long-term rentals, to take those luxury, unaffordable houses and make them into affordable housing for people to live? Why are we not working with our county partners, Beta, the Housing Authority, to come up with solutions? I'm all for exploring new topics, but we need to be thinking about what our macro economy is looking like. Everyone's talking about density, how it doesn't look good, but what's the forecast for, can people actually afford these houses? Is the rent going to come down? Are we actually thinking about the economics? And that's what I want to talk about. So thank you, commissioners.
Good evening. My name is Connor Miller. I am a Garfield Township resident located at 890 Boone Street, Traverse City, and I am the Government Affairs Director with Aspire North Realtors located in Traverse City at 852 South Garfield Avenue. Oh, I'm already in my 3. All right. First of all, I would like to applaud you, the Traverse City Commission, for your efforts to expand housing opportunities in Traverse City. I understand there are apprehensions and concerns and a desire to maintain owner occupancy of ADUs. However, studies and community implementation in other parts of the country have shown that owner occupancy requirements could have the effect of blocking the very people that you hope to serve with these zoning ordinance amendments. In a study by the Brookings Institute, they noted that owner occupancy requirements are common in zoning rules involving accessory dwelling units, ADUs, as well as zoning policies aimed at legalizing duplexes and quadplexes. However, they found that these owner occupancy rules have several negative effects on equity, on efforts to build multifamily housing, and on the overall housing supply. So they recommend that local governments avoid the negative impacts of owner occupancy requirement and simply regulate standards both owners and renters are held to. Specific examples include California, which effectively ended single-unit zoning, aiming to legalize duplexes and quadplexes in all residential districts. Their state law requires an owner occupancy of one housing unit on their property as a principal residence for a minimum of 3 years. In a study, though, of the effectiveness of this state law after 1 year, they found that the impact has been limited, with the owner occupancy requirement being cited as the limiting factor. Alternatively, after a slow adoption in the state of California of ADU-related bills that they originally passed in 2017, They then came back with new bills, passed these bills to accelerate ADU development throughout the state, including an exemption of all ADUs from owner occupancy requirements permitted from 2020 through 2024 that changed jump-started ADU permits construction, increasing them by 1,400% from 2016 to 2021. So these are just things to factor in. Seattle had a similar change where they got rid of owner occupancy and then saw an 80% increase in ADU permits. San Diego, which I think is a really interesting case, they have an ADU bonus program where they have deed-restricted ADUs of 50%, 60%, and 100%, 110% of area median income, and they incentivize by allowing an additional unrestricted ADU as an incentive for them to put these deed-restricted ADUs in place. And since this bonus program was started in 2021, they had an increase of 295 permits from January 2021 to November 2022, compared to 7 deed-restricted ADUs permitted from 2018 to 2021. So, thank you.
Hello, Janet Fleshman. I'm a resident of the city of Traverse City. A good part of the discussion swirling around this topic has been comments about lack of understanding or people operating under conditions of fear or uncertainty, not knowing what this is going to mean, not knowing exactly what it's going to look like. And I think the way to tackle that is for you to provide more and better visuals. And they should be comprehensive, and they should be complete, and they should cover the entire city. And what I would suggest starting with as a baseline is where we are now, how many housing units, et cetera. What would the city look like with a complete build-out to our current zoning? If every building that was allowed were built, what would the city look like? And I should think this would be a 3D model. I think that's perfectly feasible to do that now. And then, on top of that, you can layer on each of these individual components that you plan on taking forward so that all of us can see, what does this mean for our city? What will it look like? What areas will it affect? This is a visual representation based on facts, not based on fears, uncertainty, and doubts, as we used to say. And then, for each of these zoning components that you layer onto your baseline, I would like to see, what does that do to the impervious surface over the city? What does that do to the potential for tree canopy? What does it do to green space? And I would like to see this published in the packet, in the city website, in the city newsletter. We're very fortunate to have a local newspaper with responsible reporters who show up at neighborhood meetings in person and tell us all this. And I do not have a preconceived idea of what this will show me. That's why I would like to see it based on the data that you can generate from the proposals that you're talking about. Thank you.
Justin Reed, 630 Kaiser Drive, permit 1B, Traverse City, Michigan, city resident. So, I do support this, and I go ahead and I say support about 85%. The ADU discussion, that the ADU should be off from this, as far as that restriction goes. I think that the land deed needs to be kind of looked at too with this, some sort of land deed attachment with this zoning change, because we all know about Ridge 485, Trailside 485, not Ridge 485. Yeah, Trailside 485, when you had, that was going to be attainable affordable housing, and then the owner went ahead and said, nope, because everybody else wants to own houses in Traverse City. And that's not always the case. If there's no houses, how can there rent houses? I mean, sorry, buy houses, not rent houses. So, in ending this note, I promise you, I will not lawsuit you.
Hello, I'm Doug Kimball, 523 North Spruce Street, Traverse City. Comments I've been hearing about, it seems like, okay, you wanna live in Traverse City, somehow we're going to carve up the city so you can have a house here. But with these zoning changes, then, okay, so let's say everybody gets a house now or gets an apartment with these zoning changes. But there are still people who want to live here. What are we going to do? More zoning changes until every square foot of Traverse City is built out so that people who want to live here can live here. But it really doesn't work that way. You don't always get what you want just because you want it. And the crisis is about then people who don't live here but want to live here, and you want to force this solution on us who do live here. You're proposing to carve up the neighborhoods with new zoning to give non-residents a gift of housing at our expense and reduce our quality of life that we've come to expect in well-established neighborhoods protected by current zoning. Very few people believe that this is about affordable housing for the workforce. And, you know, you were all voted in, and I voted for most of you, maybe all of you, I don't remember. But it was my understanding that you had my best interest and the citizens of Traverse City's best interest in mind, that we were who you represented. But I might have been duped, because it appears you care more about the people who don't live here but want to live here than the people who do live here, pay the high taxes, and don't want neighborhoods changed just to benefit non-residents or just because somebody wants to live here. And there are apartment complexes. In just about any direction you leave Traverse City, you're going to run into an apartment complex that's just been built, is being built, or there are plans to build one. The July 21st Record Eagle article cited 880 units, some that have been built, some are being built, and some to be built from Lafreniere to Garfield along Hammond. And Beta's going to build a new bus station there. So that could be used to keep traffic in town reduced. And, you know, we've been hearing a lot of facts and figures and studies about this subject. But I think it's about the citizens who have said, you know, we really don't want our neighborhoods rezoned. And you've heard a lot of this. And finally, about studies, we've heard about the whole country has some sort of study about this. But I wonder, does anybody know of a study where people, before this happened, and welcome sweeping zoning, changes that indicate
Good evening. Mary Mills, 424 North Elmwood. The citizens of Traverse City love their neighborhoods. They love the city. They love the abundance of our natural resources that previous generations had the foresight to preserve and protect. And yet, when the citizens voice their opposition to zoning changes that will drastically alter the city for future generations, the citizens of Traverse City are labeled as fearful, NIMBYs, and are labeled as not wanting people to live in Traverse City. And I would say, yes, we are fearful. Fearful that Traverse City will become what many who have moved here left, a densely populated urban city. To say we do not want anyone else to move here is untrue. It's because we do not agree with your solution doesn't mean that we don't want anyone else to move here. Quite the opposite. That is why we are so against these proposed zoning changes. This solution will only allow the select, the individuals that can afford the high market prices. This solution does not create more home ownership, only rentals. This solution assumes that teachers and nurses are looking to bring their families and move into an ADU over someone's garage. This solution assumes that local businesses don't mind being surrounded by large boxes that crowd them out of their location. I encourage you to study our current zoning ordinances. Many of these proposed zoning changes are currently in our zoning ordinance. The difference, they have safeguards. What I heard tonight was affordability, affordability. There's no houses to rent. We can split houses into 2 lots. Currently, we can, following the guidelines. So the concern is, what will be changed? Who's our market? What are we creating these housings for? Will people be able to move into them that really do need to move into them? So I encourage you, pause, take a look at what we have currently on our zoning ordinances and ask whether we need to address these at all. Thank you.
Dave Durbin, 203 East 11th Street. I guess first of all, thank you all for taking on this weighty issue. Some of you for several years. It's much appreciated. And I agree with most of the changes. A couple things in the weeds, I guess. You know, maybe I've missed this, but a distinction between owner occupancy and primary residence might be helpful. If someone has an ADU on their primary residence and they leave for 6 months, is it owner occupied? Is it still their primary residence? Do those tenants have to leave when that person leaves? As someone who owns an ADU, maybe in 10 years or so when I retire, I'll be lucky enough to leave for 6 months at a time. I may move to a different home and want to keep that house with the ADU as a rental. Would that ADU have to sit vacant? Because in a city that's desperate for housing, that seems like it wouldn't be a good idea. There's a lot of things in the weeds. I'll keep it short. I think it's going to take government, I think it's going to take business, and I think it's going to take us citizens to help fight this housing crisis. And these proposals, I don't think are going to make a huge impact. I think it's too expensive to do most of these things. I think the concern of this running rampant through our towns and rezoning our towns is going to be a disaster. I just don't think most people can't afford to do it. Most people don't want to do it. But there are some of us that do want to help with the housing, physically build housing as citizens. And for those who don't want it, don't participate. You don't have to. That's not part of this requirement. But they shouldn't be allowed to prevent those of us that want to help from doing so. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Mon, and I live in Slabtown. I grew up in the Upper Peninsula and served on the Planning Commission in my town and went through the Michigan State Citizen Planner course. I don't see anything in what's proposed that's really that radical or drastic. It all looks pretty conservative to me. And I've also lived in neighborhoods in Los Angeles and Tampa and Ann Arbor and Denver, and it's really nice to have some mixed use. I'm not saying it's not going to change anything, or that there won't be some negatives, but overall, this is a walkable place. You know, let's get some people in here, get it used. Like, well, everything that's being built, it can hold more people here, and it's not going to destroy a neighborhood. What's going to destroy a neighborhood is sprawl and corporate ownership. Like, I heard a statistic that 10% of single-family homes in the U.S. are owned by corporations now. That's what scares me, not people making money off of an apartment over their garage or something. You know, there's a few of those in Slabtown already, and they're working. You know, and I think we could use more of them. That's what I want to say. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Barb Zupin. I live at 205 7th Street and a resident of Traverse City. In my civic classes, government classes, and other classes, I understood zoning as set in place to protect neighbors, to protect neighborhoods. They have laws about how high your fence should be, how close your house should be to someone else's house, how many buildings per lot, that there was a standard in a community based on zoning to protect the residents. So at this point, I'm hoping that you take a look at these different proposals that you have that are all lumped together, and you hear everybody saying this. Take them separately. We'll discuss them with a community, with residents, with neighborhoods. And I too understand there needs to be more housing, but I have this strong feeling that that ship has sailed for affordable housing or even attainable housing here. The luck of the draw from people being able to find a place is great. I have a little bit of single family home guilt here that I have a home. You know, we worked jobs and saved and took decades to move into Traverse City. And I want to rest assured that the young people, they were all going to be dead and gone in 10 years, maybe 15 years. Those houses will all be vacant. So, I mean, there's some hope that you will all be able to have a chance, young people, to take advantage of our homes when we're finished. I know that you've received many powerful letters about people's concerns for this proposals. They've been written to the Record Eagle that we are so concerned about our beautiful city based on the unfounded rationale that by creating ADUs and dividing up our neighborhoods, dividing our homes and our lots, that somehow you'll be able to create affordable housing. Again, that ship has sailed. When Anna can come here and tell you she is paying $1,700 a month in rent. I mean, where do you think someone's going to come in here and offer an $800 or $900 a month rent? That's just not going to happen. I mean, that's unreasonable to think that that's going to come through. And again, people have said people aren't coming here to live in a little ADU on an alley. They want to come here and buy a house. And I think the city needs to do a bit of homework on where are those lots? Where could that happen? I'm not sensing that there's any information that says there are 32 places in town that could be divided, or there's X amount of places in this town to be able to adapt what you're talking about with your zoning. So, as representatives of the city, we voted you in. I hope you respect the residents here and allow us to continue to live here.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Commissioners. My name is Jim Carruthers. I live at 218 West 11th Street. I agree there is a housing crisis. I volunteer for that every day. I see it at the end of my street on 11th Street every day. There's 100 people living in tents in the woods. I know, Mr. Mayor, you've seen that with me. This housing crisis is driven by investors and developers. We're seeing it in the cities across this country. We're seeing it in other tourist communities throughout this area, throughout the world. Tourist communities are not affordable. We're trying to change our tourist aspects. Meanwhile, we have our tourist industry announcing that we're going to expand our tourist industry. So I don't think we're working together with, the powers that be to make this a better town to live in. We're making it a better tourist town to live in. So we need to figure that out. This is a very controversial issue. 2 planning commissioners resigned over this. 4 new commissioners that I know of, Heather Shaw, Jackie Anderson, Mary Mills, and Tom Mayer, are running on this issue. Vacation rentals are not allowed, we were told tonight, but 150 letters had to be sent out of people that aren't compliant. So are they allowed or are they not allowed? Yes, they're not allowed, but people are doing it. People are taking their advantages and taking their opportunities and doing it. We need to do something. We hear a stat, 1 in 3 homes built in the region is for vacation rental market. So we are trying to grow up, but we're also growing our tourist industry every single day. So we need to figure this out because, as Denny Scrutato said, wages are a huge part of this. We need to pay people more to be able to live everywhere in this world. Go to any large city, you're going to see high rents. Go to any other tourist town on water, you're going to see high rents. We need to pay our workers more to make them be able to live there, and we need to house the people that truly need the housing, those living in the woods in tents. So I understand this. I was part of this. I understand this is a very difficult issue, and we have a long way to go. But I agree with taking it step by step and parsing out some of these issues, because it's something that citizens want to do and want to help with and want you to understand. You're listening to them and have their concerns at hand. And I'll end by saying, Linda, cockroaches are not fun. I grew up on the East Coast. Cockroaches are gross. And someone here said cockroaches, he got used to them. You don't get used to cockroaches when they're coming out of your kitchen drawers every time you open them.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim.
Yes, thank you.
I haven't had dinner yet.
We'll talk. You haven't seen a Texas cockroach.
Hi, my name's Angelique Norman. I live at 119 North Oak Street, and I just wanted to share some of my experiences. I am a new resident as of this year, but my husband grew up here, born and raised in Traverse City for 20 years until he moved away. We met in Portland, Oregon, and we were able to buy a house here. And the reason that we were able to do that is because when we lived in Portland, we lived in a duplex that was priced that we could afford it. We saved up. We were able to buy a home. So I know there's a lot of different, when you think of affordable housing, there's a lot of different people that you picture. And I know that these amendments aren't meant to be a silver bullet, but something interesting in Portland that has happened with their ADUs, which they've been doing it for a while, they waive the STC fees if an owner decides to build an ADU, and that they're going to commit to have that as a rental, not a short-term rental or a 90 or 30 day. If someone commits to rent that for 10 years, they will waive the fees. And I've seen that with another person. They live in an ADU like this, and it's very affordable for them. So there are a lot of people who would live in a smaller unit, knowing that it gives them an opportunity to potentially buy something else and invest in the community. So I wasn't going to speak because I'm very nervous about being totally brand new. I haven't lived here for 20 years, but I do want to say that a lot of times I hear people saying, "Oh, well, you're changing the character of the community." Anytime anyone moves here, they're changing the character, whether it was this year, 10 years, or 20 years ago. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about these changes. And I do agree, more education is always great. So thank you.
Thanks for all your hard work. My name is Cindy Rydall. I live at 303 West 15th Street. I am a city resident. I was born and raised in Traverse City, as was my father and grandfather. I do have an ADU in my home, and I like the idea of owner occupancy. I think the vacation aspect of Traverse City creates a little riffraff with that 3-month rental and parties going on. With the owner occupied, I think there's less propensity for that occurring. I think I didn't hear anything about traffic and parking with increased density. That's a big concern of mine. The streets are falling apart, and I'd like to see some of our tax base go into repairing that, and I wonder how much increased density will impact the streets of Traverse City. One other thing that I've thought about with all the different groups that you guys have talked about that are working on this housing crisis, not only in Traverse City, but the state. I live in a pretty good size home, as well as my mother lives in a pretty big size home. And the idea of selling and downsizing and having to pay, once that cap is gone from your home, and having to pay taxes at today's rate, if I were to want to downsize and live in a smaller home, I don't know that I could afford it because of the taxes. And I think there's a lot of people, whether they're small families, would like to increase the size of their home. So maybe this is another issue that needs to be looked at the state level. How much uncapping that tax base. People are staying where they are because they can't afford to move. They can't afford to downsize or upsize, and that's a big problem. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Meredith Parsons McComb. I'm a Traverse City native and resident again. I just want to say that everybody who's talked about this, no matter how in favor of it they are, they're concerned that increases in housing stock not simply become a real estate investment mechanism that will leave all the benefits of this going to the tourist industry and leaving us with the same housing crisis for long-term housing. We've been told this has nothing to do with short-term rentals, and yet, as has been mentioned, it does seem to be a problem that housing that should be housing workforce, families, people who send kids to school to keep the school viable, tourists don't do that. They don't volunteer. So let's, if you're going to make these changes, please come up with a mechanism for ensuring that it can't become short-term rentals. And that might assuage a lot of fears that this will simply become the same land grab it's become elsewhere. Yes, Amy Shamrow told me that it's clear short-term rentals, or sorry, duplexes did not turn into a mass wave of conversion of housing stock to rental housing. But if you wave the flag of giving them quadruple density, of having 2 units each double on a single lot, you might just be waving a red flag to real estate investment trusts, and that's what nobody wants. So, tough job. Thank you for your work, and I hope you can protect a balance of what previous Traverse City residents gave up to make all the green spaces and trails that we have in this great town. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take this opportunity. I see, no, you're supposed to be standing up and waiting. Okay, you're going to be the last one, please. We do need to get to our next thing. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and your indulgence.
Patty Olson. I'm a lifelong resident, 76 years of Traverse City, along with my husband. We started out, you were talking about affordable housing for the young. We started out when we first moved here, back from college, with a house that we paid $15,000 for. And at that time, that was a long time ago, but it was doable in Traverse City. And we lived in that house for 22 years, and we built equity by doing remodeling and fixing up the yard and et cetera, on our own. We then bought our second house in Traverse City, lived there also 22 years. Again, did all of our own remodeling, our own redecorating, cleaning up the landscaping, contributing to the neighborhood, being part of the active community neighborhood that we were parts of, and lived there for 22 years. And now we're 11 years into our current house, and we're working at the same level of commitment to fix that and become part of a community. My purpose for saying all that is what I grew up in Traverse City for 76 years, knowing residents of the community did. They bought their home, they lived there as long as they could or wanted, and they fixed it up and they became part of the fabric of our community. And I hope that with all of the comments that have been made tonight, and I had a completely different speech written, but like you, and I have to say I appreciate watching all of you, because you really seemed to engage in the comments that everyone was making. And it's an extremely complex issue. A couple of things that I would like you to consider deeply in making all the decisions that you have to make over the next period of time are the green space that we have. And that's not just green space, big green spaces in the community like parks and recreation areas, but also green spaces in the neighborhood that will be usurped by expanding the housing density on every neighborhood lot. When you lose those green spaces and you lose that garden look that each yard can have, it won't be the same community. And people who move here for that. I have many, many, many friends who are newcomers to Traverse City. And that's one of the reasons they left where they were before. They moved to Traverse City for the quaint neighborhood look, and that involves a lot of green space. I would also urge you, after listening to so many of the comments tonight, from all different perspectives, which are really thoughtfully given. So many of you took time to write out your comments. That's not easy to do, and I saw lots of people shaking. I understand that. I don't think this is a decision you can make before now and the end of October. There were 2 people running for city commission, at least 2, who spoke here, who said that it didn't sound to me like they wouldn't value working on these problems. So I hope you take your time, stop, think, and continue to listen. Appreciate your listening tonight. Thanks, Richard.
All right. Last call. Anyone else?
Sam Flamont, 1719 Apache Pass, Traverse City resident. A couple of things have been asked is, do we need this, and is it going to be widespread? It's not going to take over the city, and I think in between the Planning Commission and this meeting, I met with a lot of people. Some don't like me, some use 4-letter words to describe me, some do like me and agree with me, and I'm okay with that. And I offered them all the same thing. If you want to understand how this process is going to affect the city, we all have to know where it can be done, and somebody else mentioned that in here. There are very few lots currently that can be split, that can be built upon without tearing something down. And the tear down cost on Washington, 9th, 6th, I mean, a house sold in Washington for $2.2 million recently with no central AC. So the tear down cost is completely prohibitive to taking your house in any of these neighborhoods, tearing it down for $800,000 and building a duplex. The numbers simply don't work. We need housing units. We can find a way to get them. There are plenty of lots out there that can be split. There are plenty of lots out there that cannot be split, like Mr. Winters talked about, because it's got 69 feet of road frontage instead of 70, but it's got 12,000 square feet of dirt. When the neighbor has 70 feet of road frontage and 10,000 square feet of dirt, and they can split that house and that lot. We're missing opportunities right in front of our faces, not by tearing down homes, not by completely killing the city in the character of the city, but simply by taking what's there, a few changes. And I am actually in support of the R1 not allowing a ADU on a duplex. I think that makes it all of a sudden a 3-family lot. And I think that's nonsense. So I'm supportive of both. But do we need it? Mark, you grew up out by me in Groen, Interlochen area, and a starter home for 1,200 square feet out in Groen, where you grew up, is now $385. Could you ever imagine that when you lived there?
No.
$385 for 1,200 square feet. Do we need this? We need this. We need this something terrible. Is it going to create a massive wave of affordable housing? It's not. But supply and demand is a real thing. Somebody mentioned STRs. The current STR market right now is in shambles. And all of you probably loving that, and that's great. But people who bought for $360 can't sell for $320 right now. And what you're going to see, I stood here a year and a half ago and said, let the developers build. You will find units come out of this. And you are going to find people STRing be more effective with long-term rentals because they simply can't get enough money to pay the bills, and they can, and they're making more money, honestly, as a long-term rental. I know people that are making $10,000, $12,000 when they thought they were going to make $40,000. Those will become long-term housing.
Okay,
we need more units.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. It's appreciated. All right. Stay tuned till May 5th. We'll be back at this again. You had a
September, not May.
5th. Not May 5th. Oh, wait. Time. You got one? Okay. All right. With that, I think under the rules, under the my screens went dead.
Oh,
anyway,
I can't.
I think we're supposed to have any other public comment other than this topic. I see none. Okay, this meeting, the study session is hereby adjourned. And if you'll give us 5 minutes, we will let you all leave. We'll restart our next meeting.
Thanks to everybody who stayed around and listened
Thank
even
you.
after their comments. I thought that was very nice here.
Linda, what's the green stuff in your hair? Tinsel. Tinsel. Nice job. It's fairy hair. After the whole time. You get someone to tie it in tinsel.
Those were the ones that you liked.
You're not excited yet. So the only ones that. So according to your numbers.
Hey, how's it going?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and not so.
You're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you thought all those were okay, but 6 is the one that got.
6 is the ADUs and the owner occupancy.
I know it, I lost Mitch.
Where's Mitch?
Mitch found it. Mitch found it.
Oh, I know.
Like I heard her say her name and I was like,
Where were you at for kindergarten?
oh, my second year of kindergarten, the tribe got a few scholarships to Pathfinder.
That's right. We were talking about that at the podcast the other day. Where's the motion? I'll make it. You don't have it. Okay. Yep.
It's like where I really started.
All right.
All right, we need a motion We're on our second phase of our special meeting is back in session at this particular time, which is 9:34. And we like to go into closed session. There's a motion. Would someone make that?
I'll make the motion that the city commission enter into closed session immediately following the public comment portion of the agenda to consider the applications for appointment to the position of city manager who have requested confidentiality as authorized by MCL 15.268 subsection F.
Support.
Okay, we got a motion and support. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Roll call. Roll call.
I
know.
Darn that roll call. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Wilson.
Yes.
Commissioner Stanley. Yes. Commissioner Treadwell.
Yes.
Commissioner Werner.
Yes.
Commissioner Colbert. Yes. Mayor Pro Tem.
Sure.
Yes. Mayor Pro Tem.
It's the glitter. It's sinking into my brain. So
All right.
here, I'm all confused and discombobulated.
Oh, yeah.
No. I reorganized.
I figured that this was a meeting that deserved more than 3 buttons, Sarah, did we already keep
So this is how I, yeah, right? I didn't get that memo. That would have been great.
Yeah, can we?
No one's here to pay attention to what we do anyway.
Hi, people listening at home.
Oh, they were?
Yeah.
I'm trying to say goodbye to my daycare lady tomorrow morning that we've had for 8 years because my kid is starting kindergarten. So I'm gonna need some, did you take an extra tissue?
Lots emptier
I'm gonna
room
need-
than it was 3
I'm
hours
gonna need a
ago.
lot of tissues.
Yeah. It's been so long.
Oh
I
my
bet there'll be no
gosh.
protesters outside. I don't remember.
I'm surprised you're smiling.
Yeah,
I
but
was
it's
still
pretty
depressed
good.
this long back.
Yeah,
Hi.
she's gonna do well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Oh, that's Mark.
We are now back in session. This is for the record, we had a total of 13 candidates for consideration. At this point, we have selected candidate number 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 9 to have interviews. Our consultant will go and contact each of the candidates, and hopefully within the next 48 to 72 hours, whatever, by the end of the week, they will be able to release all the names that we'll be interviewing. The interviews are now scheduled for September the 7th. So just kind of let the public know.
Agenda to
So if you make a motion that candidates 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, and 9 be authorized for our consultant to
So
bring in
moved.
as candidates.
So moved.
Support.
Okay, we got a motion and support. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Motion passes. Meeting is hereby adjourned. I didn't think it's any public award.
No, no, no one will.
Last podcast on the
Oh, did you?
I think we made it.
Okay, cool.